So we just want to welcome everyone here today. We are in with Ian Cunningham from the Self-Managed Learning College, right?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. And I've known Ian for quite some time, and he's just got a lot of wisdom and years of experience to share. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. So Ian, you can go for it.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to share screen. Okay, so this is me. As you've been told, I'm from Self-Managed Learning College, which is part of a charity, the Centre for Self-Managed Learning, where we've worked with adults for a long time and only in the last 20 years with young people. And I'm also involved with a learning development company called Strategic Development International. I'm kind of honorary president these days since I've ceased to be on the board. So this session is about learning, and which can seem sort of obvious, but I don't think it is. And I've got a few things that I want to say that hopefully will dispel any notion that we all can agree on what learning is about. And I think it's really crucial when we're thinking about learning otherwise than in school. Because what we do is, I think we use, talking about all the people who actually work separately from school, that we do things quite differently from a schooling model. So here's a survey that's done every year, and I'll read it out because it's actually quite important. So this is the Learning and Work Organisation. They say each year survey respondents are provided with the following definition of learning and asked when they last took part in learning. So this is a quote: learning can mean practicing, studying, or reading about something. It can also mean being taught, instructed, or coached. This is so that you can develop skills, knowledge, abilities, or understanding of something. Learning can also be called educational training. You can do it regularly each month or each day or month, or you can do it for a short period of time. It can be full-time or part-time, done at home, at work, or in other places like a college. Learning does not have to lead to a qualification. We're interested in any learning that you have done, whether or not it was finished. So at one level, you could say, well, yeah, that seems to cover everything. And yet, the next point is that they say year on year, around 2/5 of adults say they are currently learning or have done so in the previous 3 years. Well, at least 3 in 10 say they've not learned since full-time education, which of course is a horrifying notion that people have not learned anything since full-time education, even though the definition of learning there looks as though it's quite broad, and therefore everybody, I mean, there's no way that we can't learn. When you wake up in the morning, you're learning things, often seeing new things, reading stuff in the paper, talking to family, where you might learn something new about a friend of the family. You go out and you get a bus and you find that the bus timetable's changing, you have to learn the new timetable, and so on. It is impossible not to learn. Part of the success of Homo sapiens is that we are great learners, because, as we know, babies are born with the least abilities to survive of any species whatsoever, and therefore they have to be voracious learners during their first few years, and all of which works really smoothly, as we know, in families. Of course, the problem occurs when they get to 4 or 5, when they end up going to school, and then the things go all awry, because then learning gets defined as something else. So even though this definition looks as though it's broader than education training, it isn't. Because why is it that 3 in 10 people say they've not learned anything since full-time education? It's completely bonkers, but it is linked to, I think, the way in which the education establishment thinks about learning. It is about learning things. I've got another quote here, which is quite well known, which is, I'll read out as well. I'm a survivor of a concentration camp. This was a person writing. Was a Holocaust survivor writing to teachers. My eyes saw what no person should witness: gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot by high school and college graduates. So I'm suspicious of education. My request is this: help your children become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters skilled psychopaths or educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more human. And I hope that everybody in this session would agree with that. But clearly the educational world doesn't, because it says, well, you can learn to be an engineer without caring about what you do with it, that you can learn to be a physician without thinking about using your capabilities like a Harold Shipman, and so on. And I think this is absolutely crucial, and it's part of the reason why that we are under attack from the education establishment. And I think one of the things, making a link currently to the schools bill, is that the education establishment is very good at going, well, the best form of defense is attack. So they're now attacking people like us, because really they should be defending what they do, all these, but of course they don't. And we've been put on the defensive, saying we should defend a position, which I don't believe we should. I'm not going to focus on it in this session. I've done previous sessions with just pointing out all the stupid things that schools are doing. I've just been doing some calculations today on government figures, and it comes out that almost 2 million children every year get bullied or sexually abused. I mean, how is that institution defensible? It isn't. But of course, what the people who run schools are doing is deflecting all this. That being bullied or sexually abused is just part of collateral damage of schools. That the important thing in schools is to imbibe knowledge in an environment where you're being instructed. And these kind of wider issues don't count. They don't count as learning. If we take the previous quote that I've given you. So I think we have a major problem. And I think that one way in it, and I'll show a number of ways in it, is that there are three kind of levels. Education is about third person learning. It's about it, he, she, them. Well, so if you're doing history, you learn about people, he and more than she. You learn about them as a collective. As a chemist, I learn things, it, what chemical did what. But my view is that what we are doing as humans is learning in all three levels, but that the school system neglects it, and we don't have to do that within families. First person learning, meaning learning about myself, absolutely crucial. And indeed, in terms of that last quote, unless people have the self-awareness, for instance, people are dangerous who make assumptions about their abilities. It's why we've had scandals with surgeons who assume that they can do things when they can't, because they don't have the self-awareness and the ability to assess themselves and their capabilities. So they end up maiming and in some cases killing people because they don't mean to kill them, but they haven't the self-awareness of their capabilities. And if you think about it, isn't that the most important thing? I recently had to have something done by a surgeon, and my interest was in talking to him about, well, how often had he done this procedure? What was his success rate, etc. I want to know about him, not just that he's got these qualifications. And I want to know that he's aware of himself, which is sometimes difficult, of course, with surgeons. So that learning about ourselves is absolutely crucial to be human. And yet it is something that's not expected in schools, colleges and universities by and large. There are exceptions, but certainly I speak as a chemistry graduate. We never thought about ourselves in all of these processes, or about others, which is the second person stuff. I put thou there because although I grew up in South Manchester, my father's family was Sheffield, and I was shipped off there every summer, and they were still thee and thou. So you would, within the family, say, yeah, they're coming out, are you coming out? And you would say thou. How is it today? And so it of course, we've lost the tu vu in English about the close connections and relationships, so that we now say you about people who are close to us and people who are distant. But the second person learning is about learning about relationships, about to relate to each other, to get on with each other. We talk about our college as a learning community, and the notion of community is crucial. And when we've had independent studies of our ex-students, and one of the interesting things is they tend to use the words that are in common parlance, like social ability, if you like. But being able to get on with other people was something that they said, well, that was important. And of course, we know every survey of employers in the last 30 years has said that people coming out of the education system are not good at getting on with other people. They often call it team working skills or social skills or whatever. And of course, for the educational world, that has no relevance, since all we're learning is third person learning. We're learning about stuff. And I think that's therefore one of the key problems about using the word learning, because if you take that first quote, it's problematic to talk to people like that. And by people like that, I mean people who are supposed experts on education. This is, remember, that was a survey done by education people for the Learning and Work organisation. So they have the word learning in their title for the organisation, and yet seem to have no sense of what learning is about. And I think, therefore, there is a problem in language, and I think there are lots of problems in our language which get in the way of some of these changes. Just to give you one example, we have in our language, but it's not true of all languages, the notion of a child, and that you're a child until you're 18, and then you become a person. But before you're 18, you're not a proper person, and therefore there's things can be done to you which you can't do to persons. I try all the time when I'm talking about our students to talk about as young people, not children, because by having a separate category and a sort of subhuman species, it does allow for a certain way of thinking about learning. So moving on from that, this is a picture of me. If I can use my pointer, there's me and there's my partner. We're just coming up to doing a duet. Now, this was 4 years ago, so I was 75 at the time, and Charlie, my partner, is a professional dancer, 25, so I'm old enough to be a grandfather. And we did the closing duet in a piece which was an intergenerational group. But what's involved in dance is, of course, you do have to learn about yourself. You have to learn about how your body moves, and obviously now I'm 79, I have to think about that. I think I can do actually a lot more than some of the choreographers I work with. But so there are subjects within the school curriculum that used to be, dance being one, and drama being another, where we move away from that notion of learning is about stuff out there, the third person learning. In this particular case, of course, I had to learn about my partner, Charlie, and she had to learn about me and what we could do together. So there was, and of course, that's a duet is a relationship. Even though it's seemingly quite temporary, it is about being with this other person and how you relate to them. So I do think there are areas of activity, and dance is kind of clinging on in the educational world a bit, but we know that it's gone in lots of schools because it doesn't meet what is seen as proper learning. And remember Ken Robinson talking about, the hierarchy of subjects in a school, of which, of course, things like science and maths and stuff, and STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, maths. These are the creme de la creme, and other stuff is lower status, and dance is at the bottom pretty well. And that is a real problem, I think, when we're thinking about learning and about, in a sense, like right now, showing that what we're doing when we're talking about education otherwise than through the school mode is actually the proper way of thinking about learning. Since if we're learning to be human, that has to be first, second, and third person learning. And the notion that you stop at third person is a disaster. I'm not dismissing third person learning, by the way. There's a lot I got out of my chemistry degree, but not other things. Let me move on. Another thing that I've often done is to say, well, there's two kinds of learning. I obviously they're not. There are more than that. I've postulated three already. As you know, there are two kinds of people in the world: people who divide you into two kinds and people who don't. I'll leave that with you. Additive learning is what the education world thinks of. It's where a child is an empty bucket that you're pouring stuff in. And of course, it's a leaky bucket, so you have to have top-up courses for adults and that kind of thing. It's a very leaky bucket, of course, because all of our research shows that. When we interview people who are expert and able in their fields and top executives that we've worked with, education, training, courses, university, college contribute most 10 to 20% of what makes someone effective. And that will be true when I ask the questions of parents, and the same kind of response that what goes on in a classroom has very little impact, which is of course a mercy, because think of if the world was as the educationalists wanted it to be, where we just were walking brains, it would be a disaster. But we're not. We do develop moral and ethical codes and all the things that school doesn't bother about, but pretends to. So if I'm thinking about dance, for instance, I had to think about changing habits of the way I move. And that can be quite tricky. Often the way I demonstrate it is, and you could try this at home, as they say, is if you fold your arms and then try folding them the other way, I'm asking you to change habit, and that may actually be tricky. Similarly, ask people to clasp their hands, intertwining your fingers, and then you do it the other way, and again, people go, oh, that's uncomfortable or strange or whatever, even though it's symmetrical, because we're thinking about changing a habit. And a lot of the change that occurs that with adults that I found is not about that additive stuff. In the last book I've done, which is I've just finished one this year, edited collection on leadership development, which has been what I've done in the past a lot of. And I mentioned in one of the chapters about working with school heads, and 6 school heads, in which we did one of our self-managed learning program, and we got them to think about themselves and what they wanted to learn and who they were, if you like. And they talked about the way they thought differently about the school, like the way they realized that they were being too authoritarian at times. They thought they were being open and had got like student voice stuff, but they were just, students had a voice, but not a big voice, and it wasn't being heard so much. And they were starting to recognize within themselves changes they need to make. And it was interesting that we did a session at the Institute of Education at UCL now, and invited in, because it was a funded project, so we had to do a presentation at the end, and there were various academics, usually professors of education there, and they talked about the changes that had occurred for them, which are in that right-hand column, the habit change. They'd actually changed the way they worked. And one of the professors piped up and saying, well, this is just therapy. It's what this is not a proper education, etc. Because, of course, in his head, the only thing that he did as a professor of education was an additive thing, to give people stuff, new knowledge, which often didn't make any difference to the way that people perform. And in this program, because we didn't have a curriculum, we just, what we do is sit down is to find out about people and then help them to change in the way that they want to change. And it's a problem for the educational world also to actually accept that. I mean, the notion that this was therapy was very demeaning. And these were 6 very experienced heads, one of whom is now in a very significant national position, I won't mention. And it's just appalling. This is just therapy. I mean, crikey, it was terrifying. I've just been doing some work with Manchester United's academy with young players, and these were mostly 16-year-olds, half of whom have played for the England under-17, so they're not bad. But it's just another way of mapping out different things that you might need to learn. They sometimes would concentrate on stuff like what I've called movement and dynamism. I use legs to demonstrate that. and arms and hands to demonstrate action. They can sometimes underestimate the communication issues, and one of the things that they've done in the academy, wasn't me, was getting people to improve their peripheral vision as an example, and the amount of difference that made to male footballers. Female footballers already have better peripheral vision, of course, and the notion of guts, having the will and the energy and the power to do things. So it's all very well having the technique, but are you prepared to do it? And when the going gets tough, are you prepared to cope with it, which in sport is a key issue. So that what I'm offering here are some different maps, I suppose, of this territory. That's not the territory itself, but there are ways of thinking about, when we're thinking about learning, how what a shriveled up notion of learning has been promulgated by the education and training establishment. And I say training because most of my career I've worked in organizations with trainers. Here's some ways of, if you like, mapping, of thinking about learning. Gregory Bateson is a great English writer, dead some time, and he talked very much about two kinds of learning. So learning one, he would talk, is within a context. So you learn a skill within a particular context. So I don't know, you learn to repair a car, or you learn to ride a bike, or whatever, and it's context specific. And that's different kind of learning from learning that takes you across context. You could say, for instance, being more self-confident is a different kind of learning, because how obviously people are more self-confident may well, for instance, be more open to new learning. And so he talked about that as a second order learning two. And I think that again gets missed in the educational world. It's all learning one, and that somehow if you learn lots of knowledge, you'll somehow become this educated, rounded person. It's a kind of pub quiz or university challenge kind of way of thinking about learning. Learning lots of random facts, and that you can spout very quickly as well, when we know from the research that speed is actually not linked to ability, that people who are slower at learning can be equal or superior in what they've learned to people who are quick. So there's a whole lot that one could say about that, and that's a kind of a map of learning, that the notion of two devils of learning, that I could recommend, although Bateson's writings are quite heavy going. Here's Freud. He said, well, humanness is based on love and work, and okay, Freud got a lot of stuff wrong, but it's not bad actually, because yes, we do need to be able to work, and it's why I love working with organizations, because I'm wanting people to be more effective in their work. Society doesn't run unless we work more effectively. And it's also about relationships, and about caring about each other. I remember we did a program in one organization, and we do a presentation at the end of it, and a sort of group of senior managers, but just below the top level, and the board members were there, and 6 people said, well, we've become friends, we really care about each other and support each other. And the IT director was like, it's not, you're not here to be friends, you're here to get some work done. And I just think, oh, that's terrible, what? Again, it's that shriveled up, that reduced notion that has come from the education training world, all of which, of course, is only as a result of schooling, which in itself has only existed for 1% of the time that Homo sapiens is on this planet. For 99% of human history, we've learned within a community, within the family, within a context, through caring about each other, through our ability to care and to connect. It's one of the other features that, of course, apart from our learning ability, the other thing that helped Homo sapiens survive on the savannas of Africa 200,000 years ago was that ability to be able to work together effectively. Since, if you think about it, you're on the savannah of Africa, and you've got animals who are quicker than you, stronger than you, etc. Lions, elephants, rhinoceros, hippopotamus, you've got the whole bit, and we're not as big as them. And certainly with the lions and cheetahs, we're not as fast as them, and we don't have the weapons that they have. And yet we've been successful, too successful in a way. Goodhart, his book is just head, hand, heart, and it's kind of obvious. We're not working brains, using our hands, using our hearts. It's sort of obvious. There's a great book by Matthew Crawford from the States about, he was a policy wonk working in Washington, writing erudite papers about all sorts of policy issues. And he quit to run a motorbike workshop. And of course, the point he's making is that actually running a motorbike workshop where they actually tend to focus on more complex problems, that is, for instance, specialist bikes. And he's saying, I'm intellectually more challenged doing this than I ever was as a policy analyst. The fact that I don't any longer write these erudite papers is actually not related to my intellectual ability. Being able to repair complex problems of motorbikes is challenging for your head, hand, and heart, because you've got to be heart in it as well. It's about your feelings about when you're doing things, which of course is another thing that's come out of the neuroscience research, is showing that you can't think without feeling. If we always have feelings when we're learning things. I mean, in a school, someone sitting in the classroom, are they looking forward to feeling good about some new learning, or are they feeling depressed? Are they feeling worried that they won't be able to learn this? There'll be feelings involved, all of which, of course, are ignored within the educational model. I mentioned Leroy Littlebear there, but there would be lots of other writers, Indigenous peoples. He happens to be a university professor from one of the North American bands. And his writings, which are, I guess, representative of lots of other people writing or talking about, that Indigenous people have a much more processed way of thinking, and that our world has been focused much more on things, on it, as opposed to, for instance, connections. It's one of my attractions to the sort of Taoist spiritual tradition, is that notion of we're part of the world is part of us. I'm looking out of the window now, and I can remember when we were dancing on Zoom, and I was saying, well, I'm dancing with the birds because they're outside there, and I am dancing with them. This is not a metaphor. If I dance on the beach, which I was doing the other week with a group, I'm dancing with the waves, I'm dancing with the birds. It's a process of engagement. It's not about there's me and there's them and we're disconnected. And it's trying to get through that kind of way of thinking, which is really problematic, because, of course, in school, if you, for instance, help each other in a test, that's called cheating. You get punished for it. But in the family, in work, cheating is essential. That is helping each other. Also stealing, by the way. Innovation is always based on getting ideas from other people, if you like, stealing ideas. It's the joke that if you, in academia, if you steal from one person, it's called a plagiarism and you get punished for it. If you steal from lots of people, it's called research and you get praised for it. We are really locked in on a particular way of thinking and on the language that we use, which gets in the way of what we can achieve as humans. So we often say that school is there to teach children subjects in order for them to pass tests, and we're existing to assist young people to learn in order for them to lead a good life. So if we take that whole apart, we don't, in college, which we call a learning community, we don't have any lessons or classrooms or an imposed timetable. We have a community. The community meets every morning, and students will often have plans of what they're doing, but also they can raise things like, oh, is somebody available to do this or whatever. We have 2 community meetings a day, first thing and last thing. They're not children, they're young people. and they're not learning subjects. The subject way of thinking is part of that point I've made about Leroy Littlebear. There's a subject, it's called a thing. Well, actually, we know in the English language that a noun is supposed to be a person, place, or thing, and a subject isn't any of those. It's a kind of invention. It's this notion that the world is chopped up into bits. And what school is doing, of course, is to teach people to be unecological, because saying, well, if the world's all divided up into bits and you focus on your bit and to hell with the other bit, that's why we have an ecological crisis, because of that way of thinking, because we're not thinking about there's a world out there and it's just a world. The world doesn't come at you as a series of subjects, but it's the way it's taught as though that is how the world will work. And then, of course, it's passing tests, the notion that testing and especially giving numbers, this is a 67% essay, that one's a 72%, this is a 32%. I mean, the whole facade of a numerical testing is bizarre, especially when the most important things can't be tested in that way. There's a famous quote from Einstein, if I remember rightly, that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And he's right. So we're interested in how people can lead a good life. And that means addressing all those different dimensions of learning, that we want people to be able to love and work. We want people to learn about themselves, about the people that they relate to, and about the world and about things, but all of that together, because it doesn't make sense to separate them. And the quote from the Holocaust survivor is very much around that disconnect that the educational world encourages, and in which those who work otherwise than school work quite differently. So one of the things is that the educational world starts is as was evidenced by that first quote, that you can learn skills, you can learn solutions to your problem, you can learn subjects, specializations, systems, etc. But our point of view, you've got to start with this person. What problems do they have? What processes do they have for thinking? What are their patterns of behavior that they may want to change? And so in our college, for instance, the first week of anybody coming is about finding out of this person. Who is this person? What do they want to do in life? What kind of issues do they have? How do they think about the world? What kind of patterns of behavior do they have which may have got in the way for them? Because most of our students have tried school and it's not worked. Some have been home educated and have not been in school before, but the majority have been in school and it's not worked. And once you know that, then you can help them to learn things that are of value to them. Of course, then you might want to learn skills. Once if a person says, my problem is I'm going on holiday in France and I don't speak French. So, okay, a solution might be that they learn to speak enough French to get by, not passing a GCSE, but because their problem is I need to be able to speak a bit of French when I go on holiday. And so the P world is the start and the S world follows from it. Education starts the other way around, that you learn this stuff over there in the S world and then you find things to attach that to in the P world. I just give you an example, which I've cited many times. I did a degree in chemistry. When I graduated, I could have worked with a pharmaceutical company, presented with the problem of mental illness. I would go away and create a pill. That is the solution that I've been trained to do, is to create pills. And there is a role for pills in working on mental health. However, some years later, working in the field of psychotherapy, presented with exactly the same problem of mental health, I would sit down and talk to somebody. Same problem, two different solutions. And of course, chemists and psychotherapists never talk to each other. And that's back to this whole school thing, that the divisions that I've never heard of a chemist sort of saying, well, actually, we shouldn't create a pill here. They just need a decent therapist. I've never heard that. So we have a major problem in the way that schooling works. And when I say major, I mean, it's absolutely, for me, the crucial problem about the where the planet's going and what we're doing to the planet, and to other species and to our own species, if one thinks about the current war in Ukraine. And we're not going to crack that unless we have a different way of thinking about learning. So here's another piece around the kind of interactions then that I think are important when we are learning, and we as adults, if we're engaging with young people, what are we doing? Well, of course, the classic schooling model is the direction model, that teacher comes in to teach. They are directing people. This is the stuff you need to know. Ignore that stuff. Learn this stuff. Often, of course, driven by a test these days. But even before that, it's still that notion of a directive. Now, of course, you could say, well, if you want to be a bit less directive, you could debate. And we'd see debates in the House of Parliament. And you see that people don't generally change their mind through debating. At least there's two voices are heard. But what you find from debate is a bit less directive, but it's still, in a sense, people are locked in on two sides of an argument. So you could say, well, getting children to discuss things, and discussion is useful. And when we've gone into organizations and sit down with a group, and it's a leadership development program, so people might have said, oh, well, let's discuss leadership. And I'm going, no, what's your issue about leadership? Talk to me about you, and what is it that you're working on? And because I'm wanting a dialogue. Now, in order to have dialogue, you first of all have to have monologue, in a sense, the person you're working with to talk. That's why in the first week with new students, certainly there'll be more talking from the young people than from the adults, because we're asking them a series of questions usually. Well, what's been your experience of life, of education, of whatever? Because we are all today 100% result of the past. Either we've learned it or it's in the genes. So we want to know about that so that we can understand this other person. And then, well, how would you see yourself now? I mean, what do you like, don't like? What's important to you in life? What do you value? What do you care about? What do you believe in? And remember, values and beliefs are two different things. Values are about what we care about, beliefs about what we hold to be true. And you need to know both of those levels in engaging with somebody else. And then we go, well, maybe who would you like to be in the future? Which, of course, is a pretty challenging question, and not easy for anybody to answer that necessarily. But it's sort of saying, but think about, you are hopefully going to be living beyond today. Where's that headed? And if you're here and you want to get someplace else, how are you going to learn? And that in a school would be called a curriculum or a syllabus. But for us, it's just, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn? And of course, you've got to know whether you've learned the stuff that you want to, that level of self-awareness. So we encourage that self-assessment, that people actually need to think about, well, what have I achieved and what have I not? And as far as we're concerned, it doesn't really matter if people do something and it doesn't work out. There is no such thing as failure, only feedback in learning. You did something, it didn't work. Okay. Maybe there's another way of doing it, or maybe you just need to not do it, whatever. But it's there's some feedback there that you need to work with. So the nature of our interactions with other people is crucial. And of course, what I'm talking about in a dialogue is both sides learning. I need to learn about this person before I can help them learn stuff that they want to learn. And it's not about starting with me. It's got to start with the other individual. With any luck, I might be able to show you a 5-minute clip of a work we're doing in a school where we run these groups of 6. It's 5 minutes out of a longer program, which is on YouTube, just to show what you can achieve in a context which doesn't look like it's an easy place to achieve. And you will hear students talking about themselves, saying, we got time to talk about ourselves, or first person stuff. And then we learn from other people. It was other people giving their views helped us. Those relationships. Then they talked about what things that they wanted to learn that they started from them, but they didn't necessarily know. So a girl said, maybe I'd like to be a netball coach. So you see her in the film talking to her netball coach about what it's involved.
Yeah, you should get talked at rather than
people actually listen to you.
It's just being able to say what you want and being actually asked about what you want to learn rather than being told what they think you should learn.
Within our curriculum, you don't really get a chance where you just get to sit down and talk about yourself and to hear what others are doing.
It was good because we got like a chance for everyone to give their input to you to help you.
From one person looking at a problem or a situation, they might not be able to see the easiest solution, and with just someone else's input into it, you can have a different frame of mind.
It helped me think about my future a lot more. You definitely start to think outside of school.
You have a facilitator within your group. There was like one sort of per 6 of us, and he got to know us over the few months.
We used to meet, I think, once every 3 weeks, and we'd spend an hour in form time, and then part of our next lesson, and it would be us getting together and discussing in groups our main aims for the future and that kind of thing.
Right, so the first thing to do was for you to, Will, to talk about your experience.
I've talked about a few things. I think rugby, because I've been doing quite a lot of rugby, and I said that that was one of my goals, to be better at rugby. But I think to do with films is probably the biggest one that I've put forwards. I did enjoy the day, and I learnt quite a lot about all of the technical stuff, like special lenses.
There's a secrecy rule that we weren't allowed to say each other's goals and things outside of the group. It's good because it doesn't stop you from saying kind of personal things that you feel it's all tight and close.
You have to abide by the rules, or otherwise it just doesn't work. It's informal.
What, on a Thursday afternoon?
But you have to be quite formal in the way that you act.
Would it be helpful to have James reading back those questions to you, Lauren, so you can think about what's been covered so far?
What university did you go to and why? What courses did you take? How do you get into coaching? What was your career path?
Thank you, James. That's great.
What courses did you take?
I did in my degree, I did geography and sports science as a combined degree.
How did you get into coaching?
Okay, well originally it's obviously through teaching, and then with my love for netball and my enthusiasm for netball.
Did you manage to get to talk to Miss
Yeah, I
Shipley
did.
at all?
She started coaching outside of school for Howsham.
Now we've got to decide what questions we're going to ask Jane Hissey this afternoon.
How do you plan out? That'd be quite an important one.
Maybe that could be the last question. She can sort of show you the sort of things that she does.
Yeah, it's quite tricky to know what the best way is. We have to be very careful thinking about what needs to be asked at the beginning and what needs to be asked at the end. What are your thoughts about that?
What we could do is we could let her do her main talk first, and then any questions that she hasn't said or if anything she hasn't explained after, we could always ask her.
Hello, James, Sean, Caroline, and Lauren. Right, and I'm John.
Is it alright if we go around asking questions?
What is it like being an author?
Well, it's great fun at times. It can be quite lonely, especially if you're stuck for ideas and you're working in a bit of a vacuum. And then the next stage is this stage. See if you can tell me what this is.
Does everyone have their agendas?
Yeah.
I think we started off, it's quite awkward because it's quite hard to talk about yourself for a long time.
I had serious doubts at the beginning.
Yeah, me too. I was just sort of like, is this just a big waste of time?
Yeah.
£115 left. I think once you got into it more and you looked back on it, you realised how
I
much
think
it did
I
help.
definitely benefited from it.
Yeah, a lot.
Before I started the learning group, I was kind of burying my head in the sand and just assumed that, well, I didn't really plan ahead, and I didn't think about what universities I was going to go to. Joining the learning group sort of helped me to plan my future, really.
Through doing this, I think it made me take a step back and look at what was important to me and how
you could manage your time
how I
and
could
stuff.
better organise my time and do everything to the best of my abilities, because I am a very disorganised person, full stop.
Generally, if there's something that I don't really want to learn about, I don't pay attention and I'll just muck around. I work a lot better with the things that I want to do.
It's interesting to hear what other people want to do with their lives, and it's useful to get their input on your plans.
I think it's the best thing in school, really.
I have learned better sort of look back and things. It's not worth getting really stressed your time to things you really need to
and things you really want to,
and also have time to enjoy yourself.
Things you ought to feel.
At the end of the day, we are 16.
Yes.
You would have heard students questioning adults, and that's one of the, in an interaction, the person asking the questions is in charge. So a lot of how do you give control to young people? Well, for instance, we get people wanting to come and present to our students, and we say, we don't want you to come and do that. Come and sit there, and our students will ask you questions, because then you can ask the things that you want to ask, as opposed to somebody telling you the things that they think are guessing that you want to know about. So that notion of for instance, the girl in the film was talking to her netball coach, and before the program, she never thought that she could do that. I mean, she played netball, but the notion of asking your coach questions about how they achieved it was just beyond her comprehension.
Yeah.
And by saying, well, you can be legitimated to do this because you're on a program, which she did, and she got a lot out of it. So and there was another one where a group was interviewing children's author Jane Hissey, and again, it was a lot about the group having being empowered. And you would have heard also students talking about they've had a chance to talk about themselves. One of the things that came out from an evaluation study, interestingly, those groups met for about an hour and a half every 3 weeks, just for 2 terms. That was it. But people talked about as life-changing in the sixth form. And for instance, when a researcher from the University of Brighton interviewed them, the girls said, "We now understand boys for the first time."
Oh wow!
These were 15 there was a group of 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then and the boys similarly, prompted by it, was saying, yes, we kind of, because normally there's all the posturing of 15-year-olds in the playground. So
yes,
a lot of very important learning there, which you could go on about, but I just want to stop there and give people a chance to ask me anything.
I just want to go back to somebody. Did you mention a figure earlier about 2 million to do with bullying or something? Was there a figure like that? So they wanted to know where that source was.
Well, you've got 8.9 million children in school.
Is that in the UK or in England?
That's, I think, England. I think, but it may be. Because if you then take under 20%.
Yes, they say there are some figures which are around 19 or 20% here.
Yeah. So if you, I did the calculation anyway. You don't have it to hand, but it's you just divide the number of children by the percentage that get bullied in any one year. This is not throughout. The one piece of research suggested about 45% of children actually bullied at some stage or other between ages of 4 and 18.
Yes.
Which of course then bumps it up to a considerable number. But it's just in 1 year.
It's interesting. They'll use a percentage, 20%, because it sounds less bad than saying 2 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all a matter of semantics.
Well, it's a matter of how people use the language, and I think one of the things is that language is used against us. Just the notion of home education, when actually what we're talking about is education that is not trapped in a classroom, but is freer and broader. And so when people talk about a broad and balanced curriculum, I mean, school curriculum is anything but broad and balanced. It is it's narrow and unbalanced as it could be. And yet out of school, of course, all the learning that you can undertake is actually broader and more balanced.
Yeah. So somebody was asking if there's any options for democratic or self-directed schools in the Midlands that you know of.
No, unfortunately not. We are helping other people to learn from what we do, and we're always happy for people to come and visit and find out. And also, we can send material to anybody who know about what we do, and I'm happy to send a PDF of my book to anybody.
Okay, because there was a follow-up where they said, why don't you put up some sister schools in the different parts of the country?
Well, it'd be nice. It's just, if you think about what's happening now, we're kind of working hard to stay alive. Obviously,
yes, I know. Yeah,
had 2 Ofsted visits to try and close us, and they failed. They'll be along for a 3rd time, and this time they will have evidence. So I've warned my trustees that I'm likely to be in court, because we are going to stay open, and so therefore Ofsted will take me to court, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I think the thing is it's a challenge to, just as much as it's a challenge to home educate, with constant harassment and being, legally trying to close in on us. It's the same for you, but you also carry the responsibility to some extent for the families that are making use of the services.
Absolutely, and that's really quite a problem. I'm just going to put in my
what I was also thinking, Ian, is if you send me the link to that video, I will actually make sure that we edit this presentation and just slot the video in at the right time. I think we should be able to do that. I'm speaking on behalf of my my tech team. I'm making promises on their behalf. I haven't checked with them. Can you just do this and this? So there's Ian's email address. Yeah, I mean, Ian has a very interesting story with Ofsted raiding their college and everything as well. And that is a story for another day, indeed. Because there's a real fear, I think, about these institutions doing things differently, and they don't understand it, and they're not really interested in understanding it. Nick did ask on what basis was Ofsted attempting to close the college.
Always an illegal school. And the existing rules are the 18 hours. If you do less than 18 hours, you're not. The new rules will be anything that Ofsted decides. There won't be any hours rule. And one of the things that's in the government's response to a consultation on independent educational institutions, which no one I know was consulted on, but anyway, presumably they consulted just their own mates. And they anyway say that if you're doing something between the hours of 8 and 4, Monday to Friday in term time, you're depriving a child of being able to go to school. And therefore, you then must register as a school. So if a teacher works with one EHCP child in the week, they should register as a school.
Yeah, I mean, it's like just randomly changing the speed limits on roads willy-nilly, just kind of to catch you out, really. Just shift the goalposts.
But when I say I think I'll be in court, because when they came last time, I was interviewed under caution.
Yeah.
Walked through the door, said, "We're here to close you down," and they read me my rights. They filmed me on a body camera without telling me all the things that police wouldn't be allowed to do. Refused to give the notes that they took in the meeting, which police would have to give if they interview you under caution. Ofsted and from both the first and second times that they've been, they refused to give us the report. Schools, of course, get their reports, but we're not allowed to have a report. We had a solicitor make a complaint, but then they said, well, it wasn't within 5 days of the visit, and therefore we don't accept the complaint.
Yeah, they law unto themselves, actually.
Yep.
Yeah. This is very
that people are asking that I should address. I don't. I try to focus on what I'm talking about. Therefore, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't multi-track.
Yeah. I did say one of the things I've been just tweeting is that it's not that we need new law; we need the officials to use the laws they've got properly.
Yeah.
And to stick to them. So anyway, Ian, thank you so much, and you'll be able to watch this back And we just thank you, Ian, for joining us this afternoon.